Hey there, how you doing? Welcome back to the channel. Uh, so let's see what I'm doing here. So today, what I was thinking, I was going to speculate about something. So I think about things sometimes that are kind of weird. And so this is one thing I was thinking of. So I was thinking about aliens and because I was watching this movie the other day, which was it? Independence Day. It's an older movie, but it has these aliens in it, right? And so the aliens come down and they invade Earth. And so one of the things with the aliens that's kind of interesting is they don't have mouths, right? So basically they speak with telepathy, right? So basically telepathy being, in this case, just something where they basically can think to each other directly. They don't have to, have a mouth, and they don't have to speak to each other. So in this way, they can directly communicate, basically the mind melt or whatever. They can just, you know, basically think about something and send the thought over to you in some way. So it's kind of interesting. So this, of course, is science fiction. But I was thinking about this because it was kind of interesting. You just kind of wonder. So, like, if you look out there and you're like, well, you have all these creatures, like on planet Earth, right? So, given human and the animals here on Earth, would it be possible that at some point that we could have telepathy? Could we evolve or whatever to have telepathy at some point? So, if you think about that, it's kind of interesting to me. One of the things that I've been looking at is called an EEG. And so basically this is what doctors like neuroscientists and stuff will do. And what they do is they connect electrodes to your head. And what they're doing is they're measuring voltages of brain waves. So basically they can see brain waves, and over time they've studied these brain waves so they can identify certain conditions, like whether it be different things like seizures and things like that. So over time they've learned to help diagnose those things by looking at an EEG. And an EEG, you can connect up like 10 or 12 or 15 electrodes to your brain, to your skull, pardon me. And what happens is when you do that, all it's doing is detecting voltages that are on your skin, basically. And these voltages are, they are the result of tons and tons, millions and millions of brain cells in your brain firing and thinking and calculating. So as a result of, so you're not looking at like an individual neuron firing, but what you're looking at is you're looking at groups, tons and tons, millions of neurons firing, and the like, I almost call them like stray voltages that are make it out from your brain to the surface of your skin on your skull, right? So this is science, right? This is like, doctors use this. EEGs are used a lot for different diagnosis of seizures and stuff, like I said. So this is a real thing. So when you look at it, basically the electrodes that you put on your head, they're trying to detect like basically like about 10 microvolts to 100 microvolts. And a microvolt is just a volt divided by a million, and that would give you a microvolt. So it's a very small voltage. But the thing is, it's not like hard to do. I mean, we've been able to do this for a very long time. You just multiply it. You have amplifiers that multiply the voltage by a million to make it to reasonable levels. And you can basically look at the waveforms that you show up on the electrode. But so the point of all this is, what is the point? So the point is, in a way, if you look at it, you sort of have the precursor to telepathy there in human biology, right? Because what's happening is you're thinking and just living your life and doing things. Your brain is, of course, doing all this computing, and it's you have neurons firing, and they know about like brain waves, and different frequencies of brain waves are correlated with different states of mind, whether you're focused or sleepy, and things like that. And the thing is, so it's sort of like the precursor to telepathy, because basically in your brain, basically you have this leakage of voltage out to your skin. So now let's talk about telepathy. Well, how would that work? So in a way, it's a precursor, right? If we were able to hook up electrodes through our skull and not detect anything at all, then we'd be a lot further away from telepathy, right? But that's not the case. So basically, we sort of have telepathy where you have to put an electrode on your head. So the thing is this. So you can imagine that if you had a sensitive enough detector, you probably actually can just detect brain waves without even putting an electrode there. And because basically if you have a microvolt or a couple hundred microvolts coming out to the skin, it's probably that will generate an electric magnetic field away from the skin in probably a very small distance, like, millimeter, very, very tiny distances. But you can imagine then, okay, so telepathy, how would telepathy work? So now, if you had cells that were able to generate larger voltages externally, then that would be one way that you could basically communicate the results of these cells firing. So how could telepathy work? It's kind of weird, right? But how could it work? Well, our bodies, we have a lot of metals in our bodies. Iron, we all know about iron. If you're iron deficient, you're sluggish or whatever. And then we have all these other ones, copper, magnesium. There's tons of metals, and the properties of metals. I mean, we could just look at iron, since that's really obviously it's a conductor. We also have copper and stuff in there, which we use for making wires. And we have aluminum, all kinds of stuff, right? You basically have all the metals in there in some very small amounts, right? But so you can imagine, like, okay, how does an antenna work? So basically an antenna is you have like a transmitter for a radio station, transmitting a signal. You have big power amps that take the voice signal, they modulate it to some higher frequency to put it up in the frequency band you're going to transmit on. And then you amplify the crap out of it to 50,000 watts or whatever. And you send that signal, it gets sent out to basically just a piece of metal. Right, and you send it out to this piece of metal, and by doing that, it sends out electromagnetic waves. So these waves radiate out from the piece of metal through the air. So now, how could you do that in humans, right? Well, it really could be the same thing. We already have metals in our body. So you can imagine if you had cells that all they would do, like in your brain. So you had the aliens. It was interesting how the aliens in this movie, this Independence Day, the original, well, in the second one, but the second one was just such a terrible movie. You shouldn't watch it. Terrible. Just, oh gosh, a little lame. But the thing is, they have these really big brains, and that sort of makes sense, right? Because they have a lot of if they're very smart, they would have very big brains. But the thing is, the shape of them were interesting too. It's almost as if the shape of their heads were like as antennas. So now it's really, obviously it's a stretch, but you can imagine at some point it's like, well, if you had cells that one other thing about, like, we have neurons, right? And neurons are these incredible cells, and they're a single cell. A neuron is a single cell, and you have neurons that like go from your back, your spine, all the way down to like the bottom of your tiptoe, right? So some of these are like 3 meters long, I think. And this is a single cell. Now it's very, very thin, right? Because basically what it has a cell body, dendrites and all this stuff. And then it just comes out with like usually a single axon, which is just the white matter. It's just the communication part. So basically you have this, the dendrites, this big, which can be a really big tree where all the calculation is based on all the inputs coming into it. And if based on all the inputs coming in, this neuron, it determines to fire, it fires and it sends it down the axon. So basically, for these really long axons in your nervous system, in your spine, there'll be a bunch of axons, and if a signal is being sent down from the brain, for example, it'll come into that cell, the input side of it, and if the conditions are right, then it will send an output all the way down. But so the thing is, you can imagine that you could have cells that, instead of at the end of it terminating in a synapse, it could just terminate at the skin. And if this cell that, could just, could be whatever, evolved or whatever, evolve into this thing, just has a bunch of iron in it, you essentially could have a little antenna, right? And if you had millions of these cells in the right shape, then basically you would have an antenna, and it would be a biological antenna. And that's kind of interesting now, because now I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, hey, shouldn't I be able to do an experiment and figure that out? And I think the answer is yes. But I'm not going to do anything with my cat. I love my cat. I'm just kidding. So I mean, it's totally not outside the realm of possibility that you could have cells develop at some point that just had concentrations of iron in them. And these concentrations of iron, by definition, when the impulse comes in, would tend to basically transmit that signal out from the cell. And if these cells were on the surface of the skin, then you basically have antennas, and you're able to transmit out. And then of course it works in both ways, right? So on the transmit side, hey, you're transmitting, and then on the receive side, it's the same thing. The cell, it just goes the other way. So basically any little piece of metal is very simple. Any little piece of metal, whether it's like a tiny little vein stuffed with iron in our body, or a radio antenna, I mean, it has this property that it will, collect EM waves, or can transmit EM waves. So that's kind of the thing. So it's kind of interesting to me, is like, it's not out of the realm. But here's the thing. I was thinking about this as well. If you look, so the aliens are always so smart, right? They're always so smart. Always, aliens are very advanced, and we're these, we are these stupid, arcane, ignorant people, right? But the aliens, they're so much smarter than us. But it's kind of interesting. Like, if you look from an evolutionary advantage, would it be an advantage to have telepathy? And I think about it, and if you look at us humans, it's really interesting, because speech, and the way speech works, is incredibly powerful. Like, you would think evolutionary as a person, to survive, just talk about pure survival, you would have to have the ability to lie, right? I mean, just go forward to, or go backwards to being like a caveman. Like, your ability to lie and to not tell people what you're thinking and convince them that you're thinking something else, to deceive them, is an incredibly important strategy for survival, right? And so it's kind of interesting. So if you ever bought a car at a shady dealership and stuff, and deal with shady people and other things, it's basically a pretty powerful thing. Or if you just look at politicians in general, right? They're really good at convincing people that they think about one thing one way, literally lying and literally deceiving. And I mean, basically, to be a politician, you have to be really good at that. But that's the reality. So evolutionarily, I'm mispronouncing it, but in evolutionary terms, it would maybe be a disadvantage to have telepathy. Now, because it's really dangerous. It's really, really dangerous. And now, go back to the movie Independence Day, the first one. What happened is, the president ends up seeing their plan. And this is, of course, evolutionary, a disaster for the aliens. Because, think about it. The aliens, they just mind melted with one guy, and the one guy sees all their plans hey, we can't make an agreement. You guys are cockroaches, and we're going to exterminate you. So it's kind of you realize you would say, so now it's sort of fictional, right? Because these aliens wouldn't be around. they wouldn't have survived and made it as far as they did. I mean, there's no way. Like if one out of the millions and millions of aliens on that ship accidentally mind melts, tries to read someone's minds, or doesn't control their telepathy, they suddenly get a map to like all the plans of the entire civilization, the alien civilization. It's like, okay, yeah, they're not going to be around. So that's the other side. It's like, it's actually not advanced. It's almost like telepathy is like less advanced than what we have in terms of speech, because like we're able to, like people are able to deceive, and part of that deception is the fact that we have to speak, right? Is the fact that, well, we have to, and we can formulate our words, and we can have some control over our words that are independent of what we're actually thinking. And that allows us to deceive. And so evolutionary wise, that is an incredibly powerful thing. So basically, you know, it's an incredibly powerful thing. So then the next thing you could say, well, wait, maybe the aliens, they have really good control. Now that would be, of course, the solution is that they have really good control over their telepathy. So basically when they like, they have very good control over what they, basically evolutionary wise, it would be really good to be able to like receive everything. So like the aliens are really good at receiving all the telepathy out there coming from all creatures that, you know, are emitting any kind of brainwaves at all. But they're really good at controlling what they transmit. I mean, that would be, of course, the solution. They could basically see everything. But the problem is it's a very difficult thing. I mean, it's a very difficult cultural thing. Because think about it, like, how do you date? How do you date and stuff like that when it's like you basically everyone can read each other's thoughts? I mean, what would really interesting, like when it first had, let's say that like came out of the sky and all of a sudden everyone could read everyone else's thoughts, like it would just be a disaster. But it would only be a disaster for a while, like maybe a year. And then after a certain while, it's going to be like, okay, yeah, no, we'd all get used to it. You know, if you're a woman dating a guy, you would just be knowing everything that he's thinking and be like, oh gosh, this guy's a scumbag. And then same thing for the guy, be like, oh my gosh, you know, because, gosh, it's crazy or whatever. But over time, it would actually, it would kind of resolve. People would adapt and sort of get used to that new reality of reading people's minds. So I think that, yeah, I think that's kind of getting to it for this one. So it's kind of interesting. I mean, obviously this is all silly, right? And I'm not trying to be too serious here, but it's kind of fun to think about it to me, because like really, if, you know, this is kind of like science fiction is really good about this, right? They think about it. It's like, well, what if we could do this? What if we could do that? And then you mix in a little science with it, and you know, but keep in mind it's fiction. It's not totally real. But I think here it's like it could be like really, because it's not science fiction. EEGs are not science fiction in the reality of the fact that we use EEGs all the time. Doctors use it. Is that it has to be open. So basically there has to be an opening for these, matter of fact, right now as it is, I'm sure they're like the EEG, the signals, brain waves coming out are, you know, are coming off the skin. It's just really close. Like you could take an electrode and not put it on the skin and amplify it 1 billion times. And well, it'd be hard. It's the amplifying isn't the problem. The problem is you amplify all the noise. So you have to separate the signal from the noise, but that's neither here or there. So basically right now as it is, there is telepathy. I would say that's what it is, because basically if the brain waves are, you know, these signals from your brain are coming out to your skin, and they're not just stopping there. They're coming out into the air around your skin, but just a very short distance. So I think that like if you looked at like Independence Day, those aliens, they're kind of screwed, you know, because I don't think it would work. So it's kind of interesting. So then if you looked at it, so now if you looked at it and said, well, if you were on SETI and you were looking like, well, how are we searching for aliens and how would they think? You know, I don't know, but telepathy would not be one of the things that I would be looking for. I wouldn't expect that to come up. It'd almost be like evolutionarily damaging, because yeah, so I don't know. So more power to the aliens. See, because the thing is, they couldn't even get to that point, right? That's always the thing. Like if you look at the those aliens, like they're really advanced, right? They have this mothership, but the thing is, they're also very vulnerable too. Like in that movie Independence Day, they're very vulnerable. It's like, okay, they have a mothership and they have all these other big ships, right? And those are for war. But the thing is, it's like, I mean, essentially for humanity, what we have a mothership too. It's called Earth, you know. But Earth is, I think, a lot more stable than their mothership would be. I mean, goodness, if your mothership goes up, your entire species is just wiped off the planet. So yeah, so I think we don't have to worry about those aliens. I think they're beneath us. No. All right, well that's it for this episode. Talk to you later. Bye.